It's going to be a very exciting morning. We're talking international. We're talking shipping stuff, cross border. Um, you
It's
know,
been in the news.
totally. Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. Uh,
Yeah.
are you guys still seeing a lot of people ship directly from Hong Kong? I mean, we had Tian, Shimu, like cross-border air shipments, like that dominated the past 2 years. I've heard air volumes down like 70%, but is that still what you're seeing?
It's down. It's way down. It's way down. There's like the brands that have moved production to other countries. So that already like has been in the works for a long time. That's, maybe 30-40% of it. And then the rest of it just hard to ship from China, Hong Kong into US. Fees, duties. It's a different world now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think even our customers, I've seen customers who were shipping from Hong Kong into the US, Canada into the US using the de minimis. They all started setting up warehouses in the US and shipping locally now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we're going to talk section 321. We have 27 people in chat. It's recorded. We'll share this thing out.
Yeah.
But thank you, ST and Alex. I use both of your services. I'll explain what you guys do and explain how Ridge uses them. People who don't know, I'm Sean. I'm the CEO of Ridge. We sell wallets, minimalist men's wallets on the internet mostly. The wallet business is over $100 million a year for us. Then we have rings and we have luggage and all this other type of stuff that does, the other half of revenue. We have a ton of warehouse nodes. So we're going to talk about why I did that, the pros and cons, the mistakes. But just like everybody on here, I'm sure you guys are all on Shopify. We have 6 Shopify stores. We work with Fulfil, so Fulfil routes the orders between the Shopify stores. It does, all of the split shipment, all of the logic. It's an order management. It's our EDI. It's our ERP. It's all that stuff. And then Alex has a company called Passport Global. They're my merchant of record and my importer of record in these international nodes. So you guys probably don't know what that means yet. Maybe you do, but we're going to explain all of that. Alex ST, did I get any of that stuff wrong?
No, that was a solid intro. Sean, everybody knows you, so you really don't need an introduction in the D2C space and for most of these participants. Um, Now, the brands that are here today, like we surveyed them and asked them what do they want to hear about. So there are two things that we learned. The brands here, they're from three verticals. There's apparel and accessories merchants, there's health and beauty merchants, and home goods. And the markets that they want to sell to are Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and UK and EU. So I think we can tailor some of these insights there. But can you start with everyone knows Ridge, but what's Ridge's international footprint? How did you get started with international? What was your first choice? You had that tweet out there. Let's break that down a bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying I don't need an introduction. I'm incredibly popular among nerds, so you guys are all fellow nerds. Look, and like most e-commerce brands in 2015, 2016, 2017, we just had a Shopify store and we did USPS shipment. And like a lot of this, like we were doing out of a garage, right, in 2015. Then we went to a 3PL, but we let anybody come to our store and order whatever they wanted, right? So we had an international business, but it was unofficially cross-border, right? In 2015, 2016, you could probably get away with that. So, we would just run Facebook ads, we would do influencer stuff, and people from Germany would come in and buy wallets. And it was probably 5% of revenue, right? Maybe in 2016 we had like $8 million or something. So whatever, we'll call it close to $1 million in international revenue. Now, all of that was unofficially cross-border. So what I mean by that is we would just put it in a DHL label. We would say it was marked to 0 when we would ship it to them, and that worked 70 or 80% of the time. And then sometimes we get caught at customs, and then it would get shut down, and then they had to pay duties, and we have a pissed off customer. Also, it's incredibly expensive to ship those DHL orders, right? If we're doing DHL Express single shipments for a wallet under £1, it's still probably 15 to $20 to ship that to somebody. So, we knew that there's a lot of people outside of America who want to buy things, and we should find some way to serve them. So we did that unofficial cross border up until like 2017. We saw that like other countries got way more strict about imports. And, instead of like 80% delivery rate with no problems, got to like 50%. And when you're losing 50% of your shipments, across, it's unprofitable. So we stop that. We start actually refusing orders from those international markets, and we look for, a more sophisticated solution. So this was before Shopify Markets Pro existed. So you guys are going to learn from my mistakes. What we ended up doing was setting up separate Shopify stores, okay, in all of these markets. Found Passport Global. They have a merchant of record service. So what does that mean? I am going to have a Shopify store. It is, I think, technically in their name, but we have an agreement that I get all of the revenue. And so they are a local entity in that market. So let's talk about the UK. I think the UK is the best market if you want to sell to internationally, and I'll break down why. But we have a Shopify store in the UK. I think it's ridgewallet.co.uk. Technically, that store is owned by Passport Global. Our agreement is I get all of the money remitted net of taxes. So sale comes in, money comes into the bank, localized payment processing. They take the VAT, they take all the taxes, they remit those, and then at the end of the month, I get a net transfer minus taxes. I pay for that service, right? So that makes it's incredibly easy to open up geographies and be compliant from a tax standpoint. And then also they're the importer of record, so I can get things into the country quickly and easily. So we have localized fulfillment there. So that's the way we started doing it. Now the Shopify Markets Pro, so you can have like tax reporting services still. You pay a lot of money for that VAT collection or whatever, but like they've rolled that out more across the board. But we ended up doing localized fulfillment, localized stores. So that's how I
Makes
got
sense.
into it.
So I'm kind of keen to know how the participants here on the webinar, how did they do international? So I'm going to launch a poll. So while we continue, we'll let them fill that in. Please let us know how you are shipping internationally today, so we can tailor some of these answers to that. So, Sean, you mentioned Shopify Markets Pro. Alex, if I understand correctly, Passport does it compete with Shopify Markets Pro? So when do you decide between something like Passport or Shopify Markets Pro? When is it a good fit? When is it not the right thing?
Yeah, yeah. Let me take what Sean said. Let me zoom out and kind of break it down because different brands here are going to be in different parts of their international journey, so to speak. Shopify obviously makes it so easy to just get going with international. And I'll go in a tiny little Shopify store, and it'll be like 1,000 countries there. Mozambique, they ship to Mozambique. So great, you're live to Mozambique. But what Sean's talking about, that's like the next level for internationalization and when you really meaningfully change your value prop in your cost structure. Okay. And that question is how we operate our company at Passport. We basically help on two models. One is cross-border, so shipping US outbound. Now, the other model is in-country fulfillment, which Sean is talking about. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about how brands could consider when it's right for them and what considerations come into play for choosing cross-border versus in-country. And frankly speaking, it should actually be both because there might be some markets that you want to do where you just don't have enough volume and you're never really going to do in-country in every single country in the world. That just doesn't really make sense. So what are the considerations at play here? There's a few. And I'll weave this in with what Shopify Markets Pro does and how we work here. But just big picture, what are the considerations here? So the first one is duty. When you ship cross-border, you have to pay the duty on the retail cost. Okay, let's take Canada for instance. Canada has 150 duty de minimis. And Canada also has duties and tariffs. Ours are getting a lot of headlines right now, but Canada has had duties and tariffs for a long time, and they could be really big. For apparel, it's in the 20s. For electronics, it's double digits as well. So we're talking about pretty big numbers, and you have to pay that on the retail cost. Okay. When you do in country, you're importing it at the manufacturer's cost, at the cost of goods sold. So you're paying, fine, it sucks. You have to pay that 20% duty, but at least you're paying it on the cost of goods sold, the manufacturer's cost versus the retail. Okay, that's one big consideration. The second consideration is the regulatory environment around your product. Okay, apparel, fashion, wouldn't worry about that too much. But anything that you're ingesting or anything like cosmetics, it's heavily regulated. Every country has their own FDA, Health Canada, and so forth and so on. And the way it works is it's very loosely regulated when it comes to cross-border. The way those governments view it is as if you traveled, you're a Canadian, you travel to America, you go into a Walgreens, you buy some cosmetics and you bring it back to Canada. Nothing wrong with that. They're not going to stop you at the border. Nothing wrong with that. But it's a different story if you carry that product locally and you want to advertise it there. So that's a big thing. Transit times, that's another really big consideration here. Do you have a product where the expectation for transit times is really key? Is it a gifting type product where you need to get it there pretty quickly? Or is it something where people could wait 5 to 10 days, call it like a subscription box company, right? If the transit times are really important, it's really hard to get affordable transit times cross-border. You kind of have to do in-country enablement. And the last point I'll make on this is channel opportunities. So you can't do TikTok UK. So Sean is talking about UK as a great market. One of the things that makes UK a great market is TikTok Shop. It's just booming there. You can't do TikTok Shop unless you have inventory stored locally. And one of the services that we bring to the table, which Sean has mentioned, we're an MOR, we're an IOR, import of record, but just like big picture, the service that we're bringing is we're standing in your place in the eyes of the local government from a financial and regulatory standpoint. So you're not creating nexus in the country. You don't need to worry about VAT, collection or filing or anything like that. What Shopify markets, what Shopify, there's two things here. There's Shopify Markets, and then there's Shopify Markets Pro. So Shopify Markets is actually, it's not a competitor. We love Shopify Markets. That's the way in which we help localize a brand's site. We go in, we get like collaborator access, and we go into the site and we go and configure the site on a region by region basis using Shopify Markets to make it localized for that market. Okay. That's Shopify Markets. Shopify Markets Pro, it's that portion of the service that we bring plus, so Pro, it's I think it used to be called Managed Markets, or maybe it's called Managed Markets now and used to be called Markets Pro. I can't remember, but it was like managed. So it's kind of like what I just described, but they also threw in this merchant of record service, which brings down the transaction costs and so forth. So there's some value and things there, but they're not helping you. Obviously, Shopify is not going to help you localize your inventory and provide like that turnkey solution for you to operate in the country. This is more of a cross-border model that they have with Shopify
Got it.
Markets Pro.
That makes sense. Sean, when we started, you mentioned, Bridge has 6 Shopify stores. One of the questions that we have from Jeff in the audience is, do you still need to create those different websites, or is that a legacy thing for you, given Shopify can now localize things? What was your thinking behind the different stores? Is that something that you want to change?
Yeah, look, and I posted a tweet, like a thread I posted like a year ago talking about this. Look, and so this could be out of date. I didn't relook at it. I think it is called Managed Markets now, Alex. But I'm going to explain why I did that versus using Managed Markets. So you can have one Shopify store, right? Using Managed Markets, fulfill all of these places and be compliant. And if you have localized nodes, it could be localized warehouses. You could run it off of one thing. The reason why I didn't do that, because it's a pain in the ass having all these stores. I guess there's two things. One is like the customer satisfaction side. So I can have more control over what products are shown in each market, right? I don't have knives in the UK. You can't, right? So if I had one store, it gets really janky trying to like only show certain things that are available in certain markets. So that's one thing. The second reason, the most practical reason is Shopify Markets or Managed Markets is just incredibly expensive, right? Like, if you have a localized UK Shopify store and you use like, a Passport Global, like I do, you get like localized payment processing rates and they're like, 25 bips compared to 2.5% in a normal Shopify store. So, and then when I checked the managed markets, I think it was like 9% they're charging. And maybe it was 7. It was incredibly high, right? So Shopify cares about payments a lot. They have to make their money. But if you, I just ran the math, and if you're going to do more than like $350,000 in international revenue per month, having all of these separate Shopify stores pays for itself. So that's the reason why I ended up doing it. Um, and then I'm also taking a step back. I really think there's 3 levels of internationalization. One is cross-border uncompliant, right? That's how we started. And it wouldn't surprise me if people here are doing uncompliant cross-border right now. Then there's number 2, which is compliant cross-border. So that's Shopify Markets, Passport Global, like, well, those services. And then 3 is localized inventory. And that's where Ridge is today, where we're actually, if I'm selling something in the UK, it's shipping from the UK. If I sell something in the EU, it's shipping from the Netherlands, right? And we do that with like all the different markets. So I think you need all of these separate Shopify instances? I think the answer is yes, just like to save money, but you could probably just do it on one subdomain. So instead of having ridgewallet.co.uk, I could just make uk.ridge.com. So I could have, that's probably like a more mature way to do it. We're going to transition to that eventually.
Awesome. I think that was super detailed. Now, right before we hopped on, one of the things that we were talking about was how returns influence some of your decision making. Apparel is a space that is notorious for a high amount of returns. Can you talk a little about how returns factors into some of these things, some of these decisions in country inventory, and so on?
Yeah. So you should really think about throughput. What do I mean by that is like, if like you know your business better than anybody. So if you're listening to this and you're a fashion apparel brand and you're buying, 30 of a SKU, does it make sense to split that SKU and ship 4 of that SKU to the UK, right? Like there's not enough throughput on those SKUs. We're rich as a business. We've expanded our SKU count a ton, but even our worst selling SKU, like on our entire store in the UK, will still sell 1,000 units a year or whatever, right? Like it's about that throughput that's really important. Um, because it has to justify the logistics and shipping and setting up this node, right? Like you don't want to do work to make $50. And I think returns are just a part of that. Like if you have returns that are easily to get back into sellable condition, right? And you have the throughput that you're going to be sending 1,000 of something anyway, it's like, you know, then I think going international starts to make a lot more sense. But if you're like, hey, look, we're a fashion business. I have 35,000 SKUs. I order 20 of each one and half of them get returned. I'm going to be like, oh no, you just need one giant warehouse in the middle of the country of America. Like you cannot support a Netherlands warehouse. It's not going to work for your business. So, and if you do, you have to go with like the things that actually have the depth, the volume to make it worth your while.
That makes a lot of sense. So we just had another question from the audience about similar thing. If Ridge is launching a new product line, so I think over the years, Ridge product line has expanded from wallets into luggage and a whole bunch of different items. How has that changed international expansion for you? Are you launching all of these products in one go across all the different geographies? How do you think about it? How is that decision made today?
Oh, dude. I mean, that's probably been the biggest headache this year, right? So I made the mandate company wide maybe 18 months ago that all launches need to be global, right? Um, and I'm like, I don't want to hear it. I just want to launch everything everywhere at the same time. And then we get something like luggage where they're like, Sean, you want to ship luggage to the Netherlands to ship to people? I'm like, yeah, you're right. That doesn't make any sense. It's like the footprint's so big, the storage is so big, like we didn't know what the throughput was going to be by color, like it just didn't make sense. So yeah, what we found is as much as I'd love a perfect world where everything we make lands in every market at the same time and we sell it, it's just like it ends up just being so operationally challenging. And now we're getting into new product categories where we can do that. Alex brought up compliance. I would have rolled my eyes at that 3 years ago. I would have been like, compliance, dude, who cares? But we've gotten into power banks, and the compliance is crazy around these. Like we tried to
Mm.
launch these power banks globally, and then we get people in Canada being like, well, your safety thing isn't in French. Like we're not going
Mm.
to import this, right? Then it's like in like the EU, they're like you have to explain what it, like a bunch of different that went into it. So like they're dangerous goods. So like you have to ship them, be a slow boat everywhere. They can't go air anywhere. So yeah. as we start to launch new product categories, where they go and when is more important. We will get power banks in all these markets. It just takes an extra 6 months probably.
Got it. Sean, what was the first non-US site that you launched, and why? How did you pick that one to start with?
Yeah. So we did Canada. I think everyone here is going to do Canada, right? Either you're going to do cross border from the US into Canada, or you're going to have a Canadian site. The advantage of the Canadian site, we've talked about lower payment processing rates. We've talked about um, the ability to like segment inventory, right? The other thing is pricing. Like different countries have different tolerance for prices, right? And
Hmm.
I assume everyone here is mostly American first, right? Uh, we don't really realize how rich Americans are compared to the rest of the world, right? If you go like, and we think about Europe as a rich country, you should just look at the stats. Mississippi, the poorest state, or West Virginia, the poorest state, still has a higher GDP and higher disposable income than the entire United Kingdoms. So you're going to have different pricing for these markets. So we did a separate store for all those reasons. Charging Canadian currency, shipping from Canada. If I could go back in time, here's the biggest lesson. The reason why I asked to do this, and to be super fair with everybody, I asked them to set this thing up, is I want people to know I actually would not do localized inventory in Canada. Um, the cost to ship things across Canada is just so high, and like Toronto to Toronto, it'll be like $20 to get something. And if you want to ship it from California to Toronto, which is really far, it's like $8. So I think Canada is kind of like a trap people fall into. I would just do cross border from the US into Canada. That's my advice, even with all the challenges happening with de minimis and everything else. Alex and ST, how do you guys feel about that?
John, about the first thing that you mentioned, a couple of months back, I was at a dinner with some of our customers in the UK, and one of the things that they always, all of them are mentioning how surprised they were when they launched into the US and they see the AOV go up. So the spending, the consumer spending in the US is just so different from other markets, and it's hard to see when we are in the US and then expanding to other countries how that works. But when you look at it from a UK brand expanding into the US, that's just magical to see those AOVs go up. So yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, Sean brings up a good point. Like a warehouse in New York is not that far from Toronto versus like a warehouse in Vancouver. Oh, great, you're in Canada, but you're like so far away from the major population zone. So, if there's no compelling financial reason and transit time, you're going to lose a couple of days, Sean. So, like, if your customers don't care, it doesn't really move the needle. So you're kind of neutralize the transit time. The shipping, like you said, it could actually be more expensive to ship intra-Canada than US to Canada. I think the big thing here is if your AOV is above the de minimis and it's a dutiable product to Canada, that might be the thing that tips the scale in making it worthwhile to domicile in Canada. Like imagine you're a fashion brand, your things are like $300. It's made in, forget even China, it's made just in Asia, and it has a 20% duty rate. That's rough. That's an extra $60 somebody's going to have to pay, so versus, paying that on the cost of goods sold, which is call it, let's say $40, so which is an extra $8. So that's a really big, meaningful difference. I would say also for things that are like super high return rate, it's very expensive to ship a single package from Canada back to a warehouse in the US, and it's tricky to get a refund on your duties and taxes, and whole other issues start to come up. So like, there's like shoes, I think you brought that up. I think like shoes just have a particularly high return rate, so that would be potentially compelling to domicile in Canada. But it's not a no-brainer, UK, I think you mentioned was kind of a no-brainer. I agree. I would think, you guys are really sophisticated and you guys have something local in EU as well. But a lot of our customers, the way they start is they'll do UK in country, but then they'll do UK to EU. So you get an extra like 15% of your revenue ballpark, that can go I wouldn't call it local, but you're saving transit time. It's cheaper to ship from UK to EU. So nice little arbitrage opportunity on that as well.
Yeah, and yeah, and so you're right. It is a difficult decision on what to do with Canada. It used to be easier because Section 321 existed. So like
Mm,
you could take if you localized inventory in Canada and let's say it's from China
yeah.
or whatever, you could get it back in the US duties free, right? So like you could pull from that inventory a lot easier to bring it to America. And then yeah, it's so case by case because if you have Vietnam origin goods, they can enter into Canada like free trade. So like but if you're in China, it's more difficult, whatever. But yeah, the UK is such a no-brainer. One, really low payment processing rates. So you should set up a
Yeah.
Shopify instance and you're going to save literally 2% of revenue from all your sales just by doing it this way. And like
Mm,
the other thing is it's a first world country, so they have plenty of disposable income. They're used to buying stuff online. They speak English. All of those things are huge pros, but the shipping is so cheap and so fast, right? So like it is cheaper and faster than any American shipping option, right? So, you know, it's a small country, densely populated. You could just get things to people, super quick and easy. The other thing is the EU is not a single market, right? Like there's still a lot of cross-border happening there. So like we have a EU store based in the Netherlands, and it will ship to Germany and France and Spain, and that's not a walk in the park, right? Like it is kind of a single market, but you're gonna run into delays and carrier handoffs, right? Like, you know, the the Belgian post office has to work with the German post office and it passes through Luxembourg or whatever. Like it just
mm,
there's a lot of that goes into it where the UK doesn't have any of that. It is the dream first market to get into if you're trying to localize inventory.
mm. Let me circle back to one interesting thing, Sean. I shared this with you before the webinar here, but Shopify released a new feature called multi-entity single store. So the way it used to be up until this feature is if you wanted to connect a merchant of record service on a country by country basis, you had to create an expansion store. And I think you get a handful, like 10 or 12 or something like that, just as part of your Shopify Plus subscription. And you could have that hosted on a separate URL, all of that kind of stuff. But that was the only way that you can get this UK payment processing arbitrage that you're talking about here, which strongly recommend. I mean, it's again, just we're in no-brainer zone here. Just who doesn't want to save 2% of their payment processing? And that was the only way to do it. And you're a pioneer, so you started this really early on before Shopify had this solution. And Shopify, for their own reasons, wanted to discourage people from getting expansion stores, and they wanted you to kind of work off of one admin. And one of the first steps in that was, Shopify Markets, where you could do everything cross-border, and you can configure stores, tie in pools of inventory to specific regions. And Fulfil does this really, really well, by the way. So they can work whether it's like single store or they can work if it's an expansion store model. And I heard about this feature that Shopify was coming out with like a year ago, but it was in beta, and I wasn't sure if they were going to publicly release it. But they did, and they had some really great documentation around it. But now it seems like you could, in theory, have a single instance of Shopify and tie multiple entities. It's called multi-entity, multiple entities to specific regions so that your Canadian sales are being funneled into a Canadian entity. Same model that we have with you right now on Expansion Store. Our bank account, our Canadian bank account, our Canadian entity, we still handle all the taxes for you. So nothing there changes, except you're able to tie this to a single store instance and basically accrue that value, that lower payment processing rate just from having that single store.
Yeah, dude, Shopify is making it so much easier to do all the bullshit I did like 7 years ago. So,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
the like, and I don't want to gloss over the payment processing rate just because like international looks really bright and shiny, but then like you get into fees and you get into returns and you get into
Mm,
compliance, you get into shipping and you get into payment processing, and you're like, oh, actually, I'm losing money on these things. So you should just be hyper aware of the biggest pitfalls you're going to fall into. And yeah, so I'm excited to embrace multi-entity. I'm gonna check out what that looks like. Um, but
Yeah.
sick.
So we spoke quite a bit about compliance in terms of shipping to customers and making sure that it's crossing the border the right way. The other big nightmare when it comes to compliance across selling across different countries is accidentally having nexus there, having local
Mm.
entities, accounting in each of those countries, filing taxes, and so on. Sean, you have a reputation of being a ruthless operator that's focused on making sure there's profitability. How did you think about, do we want a local entity, not have a local entity? What went into your thinking there?
Well, dude, we are incredibly weak on the finance side. We're getting better, okay? But both of you guys have dealt with my team, and every year we get 30% better in finance, but I was starting at like 1%, right? So we might be at 8% in terms of finance. So I just knew that we didn't have the skills to actually do the localized entities. Like we weren't going to figure it out. We're not gonna report correctly. We're gonna miss shit. So that's actually how we found Passport Global and their managed service. So I was just like, hey man, you do all of it. It's like I just want to focus on what I'm best at, which is selling wallets. And I'm like, it's a reasonable fee, and then you give me all of my money. Fantastic. I'm just gonna do that. So I kind of dodged the bullet. I just tried to not actually get get Nexus or deal with all that. And that's what the merchant of record service does.
Perfect. Even at nine figures, that's our standard advice. If you can get away with not having to have multiple legal entities and consolidated accounting and so on, all of which are features that we sell and charge for, I would still recommend, please don't add that complexity to your business. There's a time when it's necessary, but as much as you can push it, you should absolutely push that pain away.
Yeah, and like, the Passport Global financial experts, they're like, we're just going to set up the entity for everybody and have good accounting and tracking, and that's our service. And it's a service I'm more than willing to pay for. It would take probably at least one full-time person internally to do all that stuff, and like the risk and compliance is just too high, and I don't want to hear about it.
Sean, you mentioned one pitfall that hopefully merchants here will avoid, Canada. What are other major pitfalls that you can think about that merchants here should avoid?
Yeah, I mean, international's not. If you're a US based brand, just we have to go in this eyes wide open. International is not going to double your business, right? Now, if you're a UK based brand or you're based in Germany and you're listening to this, yeah, going to the US will 10x your business. The reality is, the US is, in terms of population, the third or fourth largest country on earth, right? In terms of GDP, it's number one still. We have the richest people who buy the most shit, and it looks very exciting. It's like, look, but if you look on a population map, it's like, less than 1 in 10 people on Earth. It's like 1 in 20 people live in America. But the countries we're talking about going to, if you absolutely crush it in Canada, you are going to add a California. That's all that is, right? So, like the entire population, this giant geography, all of these cities, all of this complexity, 20% of the country speaks French. Okay, we don't talk about that enough in America, but 20% of all Canada speaks French. So if you totally dominate there, it's the same population as California, and it's a smaller GDP than California. Same thing with the UK. If you absolutely crush it there, you're adding a California. The EU, like I said, it's not a single market. So we should really take it, step by step. There's like the Benelux region. That's collectively probably half of California. You have Germany, that's going to be a California. So you start adding this up, what you get to is like roughly you could probably get an extra 30% growth if you do go to all these geos and absolutely nail it. Um, and it's just a lot of complexity. I wish I would have known that going into it, is that the inverse is probably better. If you're an international brand going to the US, you're going to make a ton of money. And then you should just go into it very tempered. It's going to be difficult. There's customers to serve. You can be profitable in these regions. But I think this year it's maybe like 20% of our revenue is going to come from international markets. I'm really happy to have it, right? And if you're trying to sell your business, you have to get to 20% international. Like they really, really want to see that like
Mhm.
it isn't a fad, that you can actually do stuff. So anyway, all of that is a lot of learnings that I was trying to unpack for you guys.
Is there a difference in how you think about this, say, launching through Amazon in one marketplace in one of these regions versus launching your own store? How is that different? Is it a lot easier, or does it come with the same level of pain?
Yeah, it's easier to get started. A couple things. Amazon is not very dominant in other geographies. It's just like, it's kind of popular in the UK and it's kind of popular in Germany. It's pretty popular in Japan, but that's like a whole different thing that we're not going to unpack today. It's like, if I said there's three levels: uncompliant cross-border, compliant cross-border, localized inventory. Then there's like the fourth one, which is doing all the hard countries, which is Japan and China and Brazil. Like, we're not going to have that conversation today, but yeah, Amazon, it's easier to get started. The biggest problem is like the compliance regulations are very, very strict. Like Amazon UK will take your store down for a month every year, is my experience. There's nothing you can do about it. They just love taking your store down. You have to have a lot of clout to get it unstuck. But yeah, like, we're on Australian Amazon. There's nobody there. I think it's a good testing of the waters, but it's just not how most people shop.
Makes sense. Now, you mentioned it's not going to be the biggest growth lever. In terms of cost, like what does it look like when you expand into one of these countries in terms of getting ad agencies, or did you have different creators for each of these places? How much of an additional uh, burden is that to the business?
Yeah. So if it works in the US, you can take all of the ads, all the landing pages, unlocalized to any of these markets we've talked about: the UK, Canada, Australia, and even the EU with people speaking German. You can change nothing and you can get 10% growth in revenue. So you don't need localized ads. You don't need localized landing pages. All that will help, and it'll just help you get to closer to 20%, right? And maybe the best brands out there are doing 30, 40%, something crazy, right? In international revenue. But you can do nothing, set this up, and get 10% of your revenue. So it's like, who should really be thinking about doing this? If you are at less than $5 million in sales, you're probably non-compliant cross-border. No shame in it. I've been there too. Just don't tell Alex. He'll report you. Just joking. Uh, then it's like, from 5 to 20, maybe even more, 5 to 30, 5 to 40. You should just do compliant cross-border shipping. So, you know, make sure you're paying duties and taxes and all the best stuff. And then really once you start to get like in that 30 to 50 and above, you should start looking like, okay, how can we add in localized inventory in select geos? And my advice to everyone is start in the UK. I know it sounds weird. It's not Canada, but start in the UK. And then just get a taste for it. And the UK alone should take that 40 million in revenue to like 42, right? It should give you that extra 2 million burst. It should be really profitable. You'll have a really good MER. It's like coming to America for the first time again, but you're established. So you should be really profitable in that first 2 million in revenue.
Got it. Now, for these brands that are in 30 to 50, that's moving into localized inventory and so on, they're launching in the UK. What should it think about when selecting a 3PL? How did you think about it for your different product lines? What was important to you? What are must-haves? What are just nice to haves? How did you think about it?
Yeah. So when we did it, Passport Global just had a list of 3PLs that they vetted and managed and approved. So they're like, yep, here's the 5 3PLs we recommend in the UK. You could talk to any of them. You could pick one of them. Um, Eventually, what we ended up doing is the big push from the big US or global 3PLs now is trying to localize 3PL services, like, and unify them across the whole world. So like Shipmonk, ShipBob, Seiko, uh, like even Stored, Flexport, they're going to have nodes in more and more countries, and like they're looking to acquire more nodes. So if you want to consolidate volume, you can do that. Probably one, start with a localized partner. I don't know if it's proprietary. Maybe Alex will share the list of partners he recommends in different geos. So that's how we got into it, and then eventually we consolidated it with like a global 3PL. So like we used Shipmonk in 3 countries and ShipBot with 3 countries, and we looked at doing 7 countries with Seiko, right? Like, just because you can get the economies of scale, like they'll lose money on your Canadian business in exchange for your US business, stuff like that.
Alex, it looks like A bunch of our mutual partner 3PLs that do a phenomenal job. Anything you want to add there? What has been your experience on this?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. So we kind of touched on it. I heard you say the word nexus at some point. So I'll call this out. There's probably some people on this call who self-fulfill, which is a viable model strategy for certain sizes, for certain types of customers. It's tough for international to do self-fulfill in these markets. And one of the things that makes it tough is everything that makes it tough in the US. So, hiring good people, getting a warehouse, all of those types of things. Um, but the thing that makes it even particularly tougher is you're going to create nexus in that country, meaning you're going to hire employees there and you're going to conduct real business there. And if you do that, you're gonna have to file corporate taxes and have the same filing requirements that you do here in the US. So if your finance team is already overloaded and you have a lot of stuff going on and you have to handle that in the US, just imagine doubling that, tripling that in other markets. So that's one big consideration. So even if you do self-fulfill, and we have a few customers like that, and they love it, they love being in control, but they kind of cave and they end up using a 3PL when they do in country in all these other countries. So that's one big thing. Yeah, as Sean mentioned, I think people should feel free to reach out to me personally. I'm just alex@passportglobal.com. And I'm happy to share, our short list of 3PLs in all these major markets like Canada, UK, Australia. For our IOR, import of record and merchant of record service, we actually transact. I don't know if we do this with you guys at Ridge, but for a lot of our other customers, like they bill us, we do invoice auditing and we make sure everything is right. And then we'll pass that invoice back to the customer. So we provide a lot of like value add, just managing that whole like international 3PL relationship. But that's a big thing, like it's hard to, even though you're outsourcing this work, it's still a lot of work to manage the 3PL even here in the US. So you could only imagine, what it means when like, okay, great. UK is great, but it's like a different time zone. That's one thing Canada has going forward. It's the same time zones as us. So just getting on a call, it just adds a level of complexity to it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one thing. I agree with you mostly there, but one thing that I challenge you on: Canadian companies setting up in the US or US companies setting up in Canada. I've seen a bunch of our brands operate their own warehouses as well. It makes sense if you're assembling in the US, if you're manufacturing in the US, if you're personalizing the product. Those are situations where you really don't have much of a choice other than operate your own facility, just in time manufacturing. And there are a bunch of use cases where merchants have to do it. And that's also when they need to still be compliant and ship when they're above the 5 mil mark and don't want to be the non-compliant shipper. Great.
So
I think we have covered quite a bit here. Sean, what else? What are we missing? What should brands know?
Dude, I think I gave my big warnings, right? I mean, there's profit to be had. You should really watch payment processing rates. You should really look at the UK first. You should not fall into classic traps. Like it's not going to double your business, but you'll get really solid up to 20% growth out of this. And if you're best in class, maybe 30% growth. And if you're an international brand, right? So if we can somehow get this podcast to the people in Germany, they'll make a ton more money selling their stuff in America. It is like that is the next level of unlock. I mean, if you're in America, you're just like you're already on the tallest mountain, right? There's you can't get much higher. But yeah, there is solid sales to be had everywhere.
Sean, from a revenue perspective, US is definitely going to be the largest market. From a contribution margin perspective, how do you look at these different countries? Like, is US still the best one for you? How do these countries rank, these markets rank from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, and it really comes down to payment processing rate and then the percentage of revenue going to fulfillment. And the lowest place you'll find that is the UK. So like on a dollar for dollar basis, I'm the most profitable in the UK, right? Then it's going to be the US. The US is also just incredibly large. It has we have different products. It's a weird business. Um, I would even say Australia is better than Canada. It's roughly the same
Mhm.
size, but like there's less options in market. They're more willing to pay for shipping. Um, they're very e-commerce oriented, but they just never get a lot of stuff going to Australia. It is different. Amazon's just not very popular there. And then the EU is like really, really country by country. We ship from the Netherlands and like we crush it in Switzerland and Norway. Those aren't part of the EU, so it's actually cross border there. So it's actually pretty expensive to ship from the Netherlands to Norway. You wouldn't believe it, but it's cheaper to ship from California to Norway usually, right? So it's just like all of these weird considerations you got to do. But yeah, look, everyone here should just launch in the UK and then come talk to me 3 months after that, after you have had a good experience.
Awesome. Awesome. I think we covered a lot. Alex, anything that you want to add?
No, I think that this was super helpful. I could add just one interesting thing on the cross-border side of things because I think that that's where a lot um, of the people on this call are going to begin their journey. Just like one trap, as Sean put it. What's interesting and complicated about cross-border is there's two sources of truth for the tax and duty number. So one is in your cart, you're checking out and you're charging your customer for that duty or that VAT, and it's based on the information that you have in your Shopify. Okay, that's one, that's obvious. And then there's a whole other world, which is when the 3PL is printing the label and the shipping company is clearing customs, and the data that went on that label is from that WMS, at that 3PL, um, which sometimes completely divorced what's in the Shopify. Ideally, it's not, but sometimes it is. And it's just going to create problems. And the bigger the business is, like if you're off by like 4% or whatever, and you're doing, um, you know, tens of dollars, who cares? But if you're doing hundreds of thousands or millions, it's going to really add up. And we see this a lot as businesses, they don't notice these discrepancies, and then as soon as they start to kind of put gasoline on the fire and they start shipping more, there starts to be this disconnect. So that's one of the things that we help with. I think Fulfill is probably really useful for something like that too, of just making sure that those data systems are aligned so that the amount that the brand is charging the customer matches the amount that the brand is ultimately going to be charged by the shipping company. So um, one to note there.
Yeah, so what Alex is saying is, what if somebody buys $100 item for half off? It's $50. The duties on that would be $10 or whatever. But if that doesn't get corrected and put into the shipping invoice and still says $100, it's not $20. You only collected half of it. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, massive pain in the ass. But all right, guys, it's fantastic. I hope people learn some shit, and we'll keep rocking in the free world. ST Alex, I appreciate you guys.